Hello, dear listener. Welcome to this gentle retelling of the Odyssey, one of the greatest stories ever told. A tale of courage, adventure, love, and the longing for home. If you enjoy this calm, soothing journey through ancient myth and timeless human spirit, please consider subscribing. Your support helps bring more peaceful stories to your quiet moments. Now, make yourself comfortable. Let your breathing slow and your mind soften. Together, we will set sail on the seas of legend, where gods and mortals walk side by side, and the whisper of the waves carries secrets of the heart. Let us begin. The stars had begun to fade over the smoldering plains of Troy. Morning approached with a hush, like the slow drawing of a veil. Fires flickered low among the ruins of the once great city, their orange embers gently dancing in the breeze that whispered across the stone and ash. And there, standing at the edge of the sea, was Odysseus, king of Ithaca, son of Laertes, and one of the last heroes to leave the land of fallen Ilium. His armor was dulled, not by blood or dirt, but by time and sorrow. 20 years of war weighed heavy upon his shoulders, though his eyes still held the sharp glint of cleverness. The war was over. The Greeks had sailed home, most of them. Some would never return, their names forever carved in memory, lost to the winds and the sea. And now, it was time for Odysseus to begin his journey not to glory, but to peace, to the quiet island of Ithaca, where Penelope waited, weaving by the firelight, and his young son Telemachus, now a boy nearly grown. He stood aboard his black-hulled ship, his men surrounding him, sailors from Ithaca and the nearby isles, loyal to their cunning king. The sea welcomed them with gentle waves, and the gods above watched in silence. Athena, the gray-eyed goddess of wisdom, favored him. Poseidon, the earth shaker, watched with fury kindling deep in the ocean's heart. But for now, the wind was calm, and the sails caught it like dreams unfolding. And so, Odysseus left the ashes of Troy behind. The sea stretched before them, wide and blue, carrying the promise of home. Each night, they told stories beneath the stars. They sang of gods and monsters, of sweethearts waiting, and the comforts of warm bread and olive oil. Their oars dipped rhythmically, the only sound in the early light. Days passed like petals falling, soft and slow. But the journey would not be simple. The gods were watching, and fate had other plans. The first land they reached was the city of the Cicones, perched by the sea like a stone bird of war. Though the men were weary, Odysseus allowed a brief stop. They raided the city, a cruel echo of the war they had just left. The Cicones fought back with reinforcements, and soon the golden sand ran red. Many of Odysseus's men were lost there. As they fled back to the ships, grief clung to them like salt spray. Odysseus said little, his voice a hush in the wind. He knew then the journey home would be haunted by missteps and sorrow. They sailed again, and the sea turned gray, skies thick with cloud. Zeus sent a storm that battered their ships for days, until they drifted far off course. When the winds calmed, they found themselves in waters unknown, guided only by stars and hope. Eventually, they reached a strange and silent island. The air here was warm, thick with the perfume of strange flowers. Palms swayed gently, and a golden mist hung in the air. Odysseus sent a few men inland to explore. Hours passed, and they did not return. So he went after them. He found them lying beneath trees, laughter on their lips, and golden fruit in their hands. They had eaten of the lotusa flower that lulled the mind, that made one forget home, family, and time. Their eyes were dreamy, and when Odysseus called them to rise, they only smiled. "Why leave?" they said softly. "Here there is no pain, no war, no longing." But Odysseus's heart could not forget Ithaca. He wept in silence as he dragged his men back to the ships, carrying them one by one, binding them to the benches like sleeping children. He wept not from anger, but from fear, for he had tasted, just for a moment, the power of forgetting, and it frightened him. The ships pushed off under a lavender sky, and the island of the lotus faded into the mist behind them. The sea, endless and mysterious, welcomed them once more. That night, the stars seemed closer, like old friends leaning in. Odysseus sat alone at the prow, staring into the dark waves. His mind drifted not to war or glory, but to his son's voice, which he had never heard, to Penelope's hands, weaving in candlelight, to the olive trees of Ithaca. The journey would be long, but he would not forget. The sea had a strange stillness as Odysseus and his crew sailed onward. The waves whispered against the hull like old lullabies. Days passed, and an island emerged from the misty land of high cliffs and ancient silence. It was a place untouched by the hands of men. Sheep grazed on lush hills, and wild goats leapt from crag to crag. A single mountain loomed at its heart, dark and quiet, like a sleeping giant. Odysseus took 12 of his finest men and rowed ashore, leaving the others to wait with the ships. They moved carefully through the land, their sandals brushing soft grass, their voices hushed. Eventually, they found a vast cave carved into the side of the mountain. Inside, the cave was cool and still. Sheep huddled in clusters, and great wheels of cheese sat along the stone walls. A fire pit lay cold in the center, and a giant wooden staff, taller than a mast, leaned against the wall. The men were hungry, and Odysseus, curious, decided they would stay and offer gifts, as was custom in the lands of men and gods. But this was not a place of men. As the sun dipped low, they heard it. Heavy, booming footsteps, each one shaking the earth. The cave's mouth darkened as something immense approached. And then he appeared, Polyphemus, a cyclops, massive and terrible, with a single eye set in the center of his brow. His beard was like brambles, his limbs thick as trees. He blocked the cave entrance with a boulder and sniffed the air. "Strangers," he rumbled. "Men." The crew trembled, but Odysseus stepped forward and spoke with calm. "We are travelers, blown off course. We offer gifts and ask for hospitality, as is sacred to the gods." But Polyphemus laughed, deep, echoing sound. "I care not for gods," he growled. "I have my own laws here." And with that, he reached down, snatched 2 of the sailors, and crushed them like clay. The rest cried out in horror, but there was no escape. The cave was sealed. Night came, and the fire crackled as the Cyclops slept. Odysseus sat in silence, thinking. He knew brute strength would not save them, only wit. The next day, the Cyclops devoured 2 more men and left to tend his flocks, rolling the boulder back into place behind him. Odysseus had a plan. From the giant's staff, they carved a sharp spear and hid it. That evening, when Polyphemus returned, Odysseus offered him a skin of strong wine. The Cyclops drank greedily and asked his name. "Call me Nobody," said Odysseus, his voice like the wind. And when the Cyclops fell into a drunken sleep, snoring like thunder, the men moved swiftly. Together, they lifted the spear, heated it in the fire, and drove it into the great eye of the beast. Polyphemus roreda, sound that shook the island. He flailed in pain, groping blindly for them. "Help!" he cried to the other Cyclopes in nearby caves. "Nobody is hurting me." And so, they left him alone. By morning, the giant opened the cave, feeling for the men among his sheep. But Odysseus had tied his crew beneath the bellies of the animals. As the flock filed out, so too did the men, hidden in wool and silence. When they reached the ships, Odysseus turned and shouted back, pride swelling in his chest. "Tell your father Poseidon," he cried, "that Odysseus of Ithaca blinded his son. It was a mistake, a clever victory, but one that would carry a heavy curse." The sea began to change. Days later, the ships arrived at the floating isle of Aeolus, god of the winds. The island drifted among the clouds, tethered by rainbows and mist. Towers of bronze gleamed in the sunlight, and the air was perfumed with lavender and sea salt. Aeolus welcomed Odysseus as an honored guest, for tales of Troy had reached even the skies. His children, 6 sons and 6 daughters, dined with the crew in marble halls, lit by lanterns that glowed with eternal light. Odysseus stayed 1 month, and before he departed, Aeolus gifted him a leather bag tied with silver cord. Inside were all the winds of the world except the gentle west wind, which would guide him home. "Keep it closed," Aeolus warned, "and Ithaca will greet you soon." The journey resumed, the seas smooth and the skies clear. For 9 days and nights, the ships glided peacefully. Odysseus, weary from watching the helm, at last fell into deep sleep. But curiosity stirred among the crew. They whispered of treasure, of gold and silver hidden in the bag their king guarded so closely. At last, greed overcame them. While Odysseus slept, they opened the bag, and all the winds burst forth in a roar. Storms howled from the sky. The ships spun in chaos. Waves crashed high as mountains, and the west wind vanished. When Odysseus awoke, they were once again far from home adrift on unknown waters. They returned to Aeolus, pleading for help once more. But the wind god turned his back. "I cannot help those who have lost the favor of the gods," he said. Odysseus bowed in silence. He did not curse his men. He did not rage at the skies. He only climbed aboard his ship and gave the command to row. The sea, ever shifting, whispered onward. The sea had grown quiet again, but Odysseus no longer trusted the calm. After the storm of the winds, they drifted for days under a sky that gave no answers. Soon, they came upon a new island. It was steep and shadowed, with tall cliffs rising like silent walls from the sea. The harbor was narrow, deep, and still too still. The water within lay unmoving, as though it slept beneath the gaze of unseen eyes. Odysseus, cautious, docked only his own ship outside the harbor and sent a few men inland to explore. They walked through a forest path that opened into a strange city of towering stone. It was not empty. There, they met a girl drawing water from a well. She was the daughter of King Antiphates, ruler of the Laestrygonian giants, who looked like men, but whose eyes burned with cruel hunger. She led them to her father's palace, and they were welcomed not with kindness, but with teeth and claws. Antiphates seized one of the men and devoured him in a single gulp. The others fled, but it was too late. Giants poured from the hills, roaring, hurling boulders the size of houses. Odysseus watched in horror from his ship outside the harbor as one by one the others were sunk crushed by stone, their cries swallowed by the sea. Only Odysseus's ship escaped. They rowed in silence, their eyes hollow. So many had been lost. Brothers, friends gone in a flash of terror. The sea, once a promise of home, now felt endless and cold. That night, no one spoke. They drifted like shadows beneath a sky full of stars, stars that watched but did not speak. And in Odysseus's heart, the weight of guilt grew heavier still. After many days, the crew reached another island, lush and green, with birdsong drifting through the air. Tall trees bent toward the sea, and wild flowers blanketed the meadows in soft color. It was Ai, home of Circe, the enchantress. They anchored the ship on the shore, and Odysseus climbed a cliff to watch. Smoke curled from somewhere inland, the scent of herbs and firewood carried on the breeze. He sent half his men, led by Eurylochus, to explore. They followed the trail into a sun-dappled glade, where a great stone house stood among wild roses. From within came the sound of music gentle and sad. Circe stood at the doorway. She was radiant, her hair the color of burnished gold, her robe woven of twilight. She welcomed them with a smile and invited them inside. The men, weary and enchanted, followed. Only Eurylochus remained outside, wary and still. Inside, Circe offered them food and honeyed wine, but her smile hid power. As they drank, she whispered ancient words, and with a wave of her hand, they were transformed into pigs. Eurylochus fled in terror and returned to Odysseus. "My lord," he said, breathless, "the men. She has turned them into beasts." Odysseus took his sword and went alone. As he strode into the clearing, Hermes appeared a figure of light and motion, with winged sandals and a voice like wind through reeds. He offered Odysseus a gift, a magical herb called moly, white as snow, with a black root. "Take this," said Hermes, "and her spells will not touch you." Odysseus nodded and entered the house. Circe greeted him, as she had the others. She offered him wine, cast her spell, but nothing happened. Odysseus rose, sword in hand, and Circe, shocked, dropped to her knees. "No more tricks," he said. Circe, moved by his strength and the god's protection, released the spell. One by one, his men became men again. She wept and invited them to stay not as prisoners, but as guests. And so they rested. For a full year, they lived on Aea. Forgetting the weight of sorrow, Circe's house became a place of healing. Wounds closed, dreams returned. The men laughed again beneath the trees, and Odysseus found a kind of peace. But home called to him, always. At last, Odysseus went to Circe and spoke gently. "My heart longs for Ithaca. I must return." She nodded. "Then you must sail to the land of the dead. Only there can you learn what path awaits you." She gave him a black lamb, instructions for the rite, and a kiss of farewell. The next morning, beneath a gray sky, they set sail once more. The sea shimmered like glass, and the winds whispered secrets not meant for mortal ears. They were sailing not to land or island now, but to the underworld itself. The sails were pulled taut by a strange wind, as Odysseus and his crew sailed toward a place where no mortal wished to go. The sea darkened beneath their keel, and the sky turned to pale silver. as if the world itself were holding its breath. They came to the land of the Cimmerians, a shore cloaked always in shadow, where the sun never rose, and mist clung low to the waves. Cold seeped into their bones as they disembarked. The trees here were gnarled and silent, and the wind carried whispers that didn't belong to the living. At the edge of a narrow gorge, they found the place Circe had described. Odysseus drew his sword and dug a trench in the black earth. Into it, he poured offerings, milk and honey, sweet wine, water, and barley. Then he took the black lamb and sacrificed it, letting its blood soak into the soil. He knelt and called to the dead. The wind stilled. The air grew thick, and from the shadows they came. Shapes without color, faces without flesh. Spirits of those who once breathed and loved, now only drifting echoes. They moaned softly, drawn to the blood, but Odysseus held them back with his sword, waiting for the one he sought. At last, Tiresias arrived. He appeared as a tall figure cloaked in flowing gray, with sightless eyes that still seemed to see through time itself. Odysseus stepped forward and bowed his head. "Tiresias," he said, "I seek my way home." The ghost drank the blood and began to speak, his voice like wind through dry leaves. "You must suffer more before you reach Ithaca," he said softly. "Poseidon still hunts you for blinding his son. But heed this warning. When you come to the island of the sun god Helios, do not harm his sacred cattle. If you do, ruin shall follow." Odysseus listened, each word heavy with fate. "But take heart," Tiresias added, "for though you shall suffer, you will reach home alone, weary but alive." He faded back into the mist. Others came next. His mother, Anticlea, appeared, her face soft and lined with sorrow. Odysseus knelt beside her spirit and wept. "My son," she whispered, "you have wandered so far." He asked of Ithaca, of his wife and son. She smiled gently. "Penelope waits. Telemachus has grown tall, but time slips past like a stream. Come home before all is lost." He tried to embrace her, but she vanished through his arms like smoke. Then came the ghosts of warriors Agamemnon, who spoke of betrayal and murder upon his return. Achilles, proud and sorrowful, who declared that even the greatest glory was hollow beside life's simplest joys. "You're lucky to be alive, Odysseus," said Achilles. "Never forget it." He nodded, silently promising he wouldn't. More spirits rose, lost friends, fallen soldiers, silent figures from Troy. Each had a story, each had a wound. The night wore on, and the dead drifted like fog. At last, Odysseus rose and signaled his men. They hurried back to the ship, hearts heavy and eyes wide, with things no sailor should ever see. As the sails rose and they pushed off from the land of shadow, the wind began to breathe again. The mist lifted. The underworld faded behind them. Back on open waters, Odysseus sat alone at the stern, his hand resting on the polished wood. He thought of his mother, of Telemachus, of Penelope by her hearth, of the warning. The sun god's cattle must not be touched, and he knew the greatest trials still lay ahead. But for now, the sea was calm, and the stars, distant and ancient, watched silently overhead. The sea was soft and glassy as the ship slipped forward. After the dark shores of the underworld, the sunlight felt warmer, even gentler. But Circe's warning echoed still in Odysseus's mind. "You will pass the sirens. she had said. Voices like honey will call to you. If you listen, you will never return. And so he prepared. He took a block of wax and warmed it between his palms, pressing it into the ears of each sailor. Then, with rope strong and thick, he bound himself to the mast. His eyes met his crew's one last time, clear and firm. "Do not free me," he told them, "no matter what I say." They nodded, and the ship glided forward. The island came into view, a low hill, crowned with flowers, and a strange brightness in the air, as if the very light of the world was drawn there. And then the voices, soft at first, like lullabies drifting on the breeze. Then, sweeter, richer, closer. "Odysseus," they sang. "Odysseus, come to us. We know your name. We know your tale." His heart beat faster. The voices wove around him like silk, promising knowledge, praise, and peace. "We will tell you what the gods keep hidden. We will show you the end of all things. Come ashore, come ashore." Tears welled in his eyes. He begged his men to turn the ship, pleaded with them to untie him. He cried out in longing and despair, but they rowed on, deaf and steady, eyes fixed on the horizon. The voices grew softer, then faded entirely. When Odysseus came back to himself, the ropes had left marks on his arms. He looked to the crew and nodded with gratitude. But the worst was still ahead. Circe had warned of twin terrors, Scylla and Charybdis. Charybdis waited on one side, a whirlpool that drank the sea down 3 times a day and spat it back with thunder. On the other side, high in a dark cliff, Scylla waited, her 6 heads like serpents, her mouth filled with rows of snapping teeth. There was no safe way between. Odysseus chose the lesser evil. "Row close to the cliffs," he said. "Do not stop. Do not look back." He did not tell them of Scylla, the full truth. Sometimes a leader must carry fear alone. As they neared, the sea hissed and frothed. The whirlpool groaned to their left, the ship tilting slightly toward its pull. The cliff loomed to the right, jagged and dark. Then it happened. Scylla struck. 6 shapes fast as lightning shot from the shadows. 6 men were snatched from the deck screaming, gone in an instant. Odysseus gripped the helm, his knuckles white. He could not save them. He could only keep sailing, eyes fixed forward, past sorrow and storm, into the silence that followed. At last, the sea widened again. The danger passed. The wind was kind, but they had left part of themselves behind in that narrow passage, where the sea itself became a mouth and the rocks bore teeth. Exhausted and shaken, the crew came upon a green, sunlit island, a place where the grass grew tall and golden, and the sky seemed always clear. It was Thrinacia, sacred to Helios, the sun god. Here, his immortal cattle grazed, guarded by divine daughters, and watched closely by the gods. Circe and Tiresias had warned Odysseus, "Do not touch them." He gathered his crew and spoke with stern kindness. "We must not harm the cattle, even in hunger, even in fear. If we do, ruin will follow." The men agreed, but the days stretched on. A storm came fierce and unrelenting sent by Zeus, and they could not leave the island. Day after day they grew weaker, the food stores emptied. Hunger gnawed at their will. One night, as Odysseus prayed alone inland, Eurylochus spoke to the others by the fire. "What is death, truly?" he asked softly. "If we die at sea, it is the gods' will. But must we starve while sacred cows fatten in the fields?" Desperation gave way to defiance. They sacrificed the cattle. They roasted the meat over the fire, and the smell drifted into the sky. Odysseus returned too late. Smoke rose, and the men looked up with guilt and fear. He closed his eyes, heart sinking. The sky darkened. Helios, far above, saw what had been done. In fury, he turned to Zeus. "If you do not punish them," the sun god declared, "I will take the sun and plunge the world into night." Zeus agreed. When the winds calmed and the ship set sail once more, the sea waited like a still breath. Then, in the open waters, Zeus struck. A bolt of lightning shattered the mast. The ship broke apart in flame and foam. One by one, the men were swallowed by the waves. Only Odysseus survived. Clinging to broken wood, he drifted, tossed by the sea like a leaf in a storm. Days passed. Winds howled. The sky offered no comfort. At last, he washed ashore on a quiet island, where tall trees leaned low and birds sang in the branches. It was Ogygia, and there, watching from the shadows, stood Calypso. The sea had finally gone quiet. For days and nights, Odysseus drifted alone on the open water, clinging to a splintered piece of timber, the wreckage of his past, of his choices, and of his men. The sky was a blur of silver and blue. The stars no longer whispered their stories. Even time seemed to hesitate. Then came an island green, secret and still. Ogygia. Its shores were wrapped in soft mist. Vines bloomed with purple flowers. Trees arched in gentle curves, bearing golden fruit. Waterfalls whispered from high cliffs, their song neither sad nor joyful, only patient. And there, in a cave hidden by ivy and starlight, lived Calypso. She was a nymph, timeless and beautiful, with hair like waves and eyes like distant rain. She found Odysseus lying on the sand, sea-salted and barely breathing. She knelt beside him, brushed the wet hair from his brow, and brought him into her home. Days turned to weeks, weeks into months. Under her care, Odysseus healed. His wounds closed, his breath steadied. She clothed him in linen, fed him with olives, figs, and wine. She sang him to sleep each night beside a fire whose light never flickered. And she loved him. "I can make you forget," she whispered once, when the stars glimmered through the cave's mouth. "Stay with me, Odysseus. I will make you immortal. You will never know pain again." He looked at her, his heart full of both gratitude and sorrow. "You are kind," he said, "and this island is a paradise, but I cannot forget. I do not belong to the sea, nor to gods. I belong to my wife, to my son, to the soil of Ithaca." Each day, he walked to the shore and stared out at the horizon, his heart heavy with longing, not for adventure anymore, but for home, for a quiet hearth, for Penelope's voice. And the gods, watching from above, saw this. Athena, ever wise and loyal to Odysseus, went to Olympus and stood before Zeus. "Enough," she said. "You have tested him. Let him return." Zeus nodded. He sent Hermes, the messenger of gods, swift-footed and bright. Hermes flew across the sky like a streak of golden fire, descending to Ogyggia's woods where Calypso waited, brushing the leaves of an olive tree. "You must let him go," Hermes said gently. "This is not his fate." Calypso's heart broke. She wept, not with rage, but with a sorrow so old it seemed part of the island itself. She returned to the cave, found Odysseus by the fire and sat beside him. "You are free," she said softly. "I will not hold you. I will help you build a raft and send you with wind and water, but I will miss you." Odysseus took her hand and kissed it. "You saved me," he whispered. "I will not forget." Together, they built a raft of cedar logs and wove strong ropes of bark and vine. Calypso gave him food, skins of water, and a sail of woven cloth. When the morning came, she led him to the water's edge. "I wish the world were different," she said. "So do I," he replied. Then, with a breeze at his back and the raft beneath him, Odysseus once again left shore. The sea shimmered beneath a sky brushed with golden light. Birds soared above. Dolphins danced beside the raft. And far ahead unseen, but always waiting, was Ithaca. The sun rose softly over the calm sea, as Odysseus drifted on his fragile raft. Days had passed since the fury of Helios's wrath and the destruction of his ship. The salt breeze kissed his skin, the gentle waves rocked him like a cradle, and each star overhead seemed to promise hope. Finally, after 17 long days, the familiar shape of Ithaca appeared, a jagged silhouette against the dawn sky, the land of olive groves and rugged hills, the place where his heart truly belonged. His eyes, though weary, brightened as memories flooded back the laughter of his son, the warmth of his wife's smile, the peaceful quiet of the stone hearth. But he knew his home was no longer the safe refuge he had left behind. Suitors roamed his halls, feasting on his wealth, courting Penelope with boldness, and daring to claim his throne. Odysseus's heart tightened, but he masked his pain beneath a cloak of patience. At the shore, the goddess Athena awaited, veiled in mist and mystery. Her eyes glimmered with wisdom and fierce loyalty. "Move carefully, Odysseus," she whispered. "The time for swords has not yet come. First, you must walk among your people unseen. Let them test your spirit." With a gentle touch, she transformed him. His hair grayed, his back bent, his hands calloused like a beggar's. His voice grew rough, low, a whisper of the man he once was. Disguised, he stepped quietly along winding paths beneath gnarled olive trees, feeling the earth beneath his feet, hearing the soft rustle of leaves and the distant murmur of waves. He found shelter in the humble hut of Eumaeus, his loyal swineherd, who welcomed the stranger with open kindness, a rare light in the shadowed land. Eumaeus shared stories of the palace, of the suitor's arrogance, and of Penelope's quiet grief. Night settled gently, and the two men shared bread and wine beneath a sky scattered with stars. The fire crackled softly, shadows dancing like memories across their faces. Soon after, Telemachus returned, weathered but grown tall, a young man shaped by loss and hope. Father and son met in the quiet darkness, the world shrinking to the warmth of a single embrace. "Father," breathed Telemachus, tears shining in the moonlight, "you have returned." No words were needed. Their hearts spoke in silence, their souls knitting back together after years apart. Together, they began to weave a plan slow and steady, careful and sure. The palace would be reclaimed, but only when the moment was right. Morning dawned, pale and still. Ithaca's hills were bathed in gold, and soft breezes carried the scent of wild thyme and sea salt. Inside the palace, shadows stretched long. Odysseus, still cloaked in beggar's rags, shuffled among the laughter and mockery of the suitors. They saw a weak old man, broken and ignored. But beneath that guise, the true king's spirit burned quietly, fiercely. Penelope watched from a quiet corner, her eyes deep pools of sadness and hope. The years had aged her, but her heart remained strong. She studied the stranger, searching for a sign, a spark, a truth hidden beneath dust and wrinkles. Their eyes met briefly. A silent dance began, questions and answers spoken without words. Later, in the solitude of her chamber, she spoke to the stranger softly, her voice a thread of longing and caution. "Tell me of your travels," she said, "of kingdoms and kings. Tell me your story." Odysseus spoke gently, weaving tales of distant lands and heroes lost, careful never to reveal his true self. Still, her heart stirred. There was something familiar in the timbre of his voice, the shadow in his eyes, the quiet strength beneath the frailty. In the days that followed, Odysseus tested the loyalty of his servants and the resolve of his son. Quiet allies revealed themselves: Eumaeus, faithful and true; Philoetius, the cowherd, steady and kind. Together they prepared. The suitors grew restless, their arrogance growing like a dark cloud. They mocked the beggar, threw scraps, and feasted without thought of the consequences. Then the moment came. Penelope, weary but resolute, made a challenge. The suitor who could string Odysseus's mighty bow and shoot an arrow through 12 axe heads would win her hand. One by one, the suitors tried and failed. Their hands were soft with indulgence, their pride greater than their skill. Laughter and scorn filled the hall. Then the beggar stepped forward. The room fell silent. With a slow breath, Odysseus took the bow in his hands. The transformation was subtle but undeniable. His form straightened, his eyes flamed with quiet fire, his muscles tensed with the strength of a lifetime's trials. He strung the bow with ease. The arrow sang through the air, piercing every axe head in perfect sequence. The hall gasped. Odysseus revealed himself. "I am your king," he said, voice calm but thunderous. "You have dishonored my house and my wife." Chaos erupted. With Telemachus and loyal servants at his side, Odysseus moved with deadly precision. The suitors, caught off guard and weighed down by their arrogance, fell one by one. The battle was swift but fierce, not a shout or rage-filled cry, but the quiet certainty of justice reclaiming its place. When the last suitor fell, silence returned. Penelope ascended the steps, her eyes wide and searching. Doubt and hope mingled as she studied the man before her. "Where is the man I loved?" she asked softly. Odysseus smiled faintly. "Here, and yet changed by all that has passed." To prove himself, he spoke of their bed, a secret only they shared. "No one could move it," he said gently, "for it is rooted to an olive tree, carved by my own hand." Tears filled her eyes. They embraced a long, quiet embrace that healed years of waiting and longing. Days later, Odysseus visited his father Laertes, who had aged beyond years in grief. In the quiet orchard where they once walked, father and son reunited with tears and stories of the past. Peace settled over Ithaca like a soft cloak. The gods smiled down, the olive branches swayed, and the sea whispered a lullaby. Home at last. As the sun set slowly beyond the hills of Ithaca, peace settles softly over the land. Odysseus, weary yet whole, rests now beneath familiar olive trees. His journey long and full of trials, gods, monsters, and loss, has finally come to rest. The halls are quiet once more, the laughter of loved ones returning like a gentle breeze. Penelope's faithful heart is mended. Telemachus grows strong beneath his father's watchful eye. Even the gods have smiled upon this homecoming, their whispers fading into the calm night sky. And so, this story ends not in thunder or battle, but in the soft glow of forgiveness, healing, and belonging. May you carry its gentle lessons with you, that no matter how far we wander, home is the light we follow, the peace we seek, and the love that waits patiently. Thank you for traveling this ancient path with me. Rest well, dear listener, and may your dreams be filled with calm seas, starlit skies, and the comfort of a journey complete. Good night,